I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KEØOG. This video marks my first foray into a new area, sponsored product reviews. This review of the TYT model UV8000E is sponsored by Radioddity.com, a relative newcomer to the amateur radio marketplace focused on getting you the best value for your money. They kindly provided me with the new TYT UV8000E dual band, dual watch, cross-band repeating 10-watt handheld and have asked for a thorough review. As someone who creates training videos for technician, general, and amateur extra license classes, I'm often asked to recommend gear. Do I recommend this as a first radio for a new technician? Yes, it's a great radio. How about for the extra class ham who'd like to experiment with some of the other features? Certainly. The price is right, and it's a great rig out of the box. Mind you, there are many options out there, but I think you'll be impressed by this radio. I certainly am. And if you purchase it through a link I'll provide, you'll also be supporting my channel, Ham Radio Answers. More later. The radio is one of the new breed of Chinese VHF, UHF radios coming into the American ham radio marketplace. I freely admit that the Japanese user guides are far easier to read than the Chinese. Sometimes the Chinese manuals are okay in spots, sometimes their English is humorous, and sometimes seemingly impenetrable. But with effort this can be overcome. The Chinese radios as a class are rather different from their traditional Japanese counterparts and are more difficult to program from the keypad, but the lower prices of the Chinese gear are compelling. The Chinese radios are no longer novelties and are here to stay as an essential ingredient in ham radio. Let me just mention Radioddity. They are one of the several new online equipment providers that have entered the market to challenge the dominance of the old boys. Radioddity also provides several models of VHF and UHF gear, as well as oscilloscopes and other test equipment. So let's look at the radio. It's a dual band radio, meaning both 2 meters and 70 centimeters. Note that this is a purely analog radio with no digital voice capabilities, although I tried it on APRS and it works fine. One key attraction is the 10-watt output, though I would warn you to point the antenna away from your head for RF safety reasons. The radio has gobs of memory channels, and you can give channels names. For example, the nearest repeater to me is atop a hill called Flat Top. The radio is dual watch, meaning that it can listen to 2 different frequencies at the same time, and you can hear a station coming in on either frequency, though admittedly, if you are hearing someone on one frequency, the other is momentarily blocked. The radio has all the features needed to use repeaters on both 2 meters and 70 centimeters, and it is indeed possible to set repeaters in memory using the keypad, though frankly, you'll be happier doing it via the programming software. Now, the key feature that separates the E model from its predecessors is the cross-band repeat function, meaning that it can listen on one band, say 2 meters, and simultaneously retransmit on the other band, 70 centimeters, and vice versa. I'll explain how that works later. Setting this up for the first time requires the use of the programming software, but after that, it can be turned on and off at will with a simple menu command. Let's take a look at what comes in the box. Note that the radio serial number is here on the flap. Here's the battery charger. You use this by sticking the entire radio, or just the battery, into the charger. The manual says it sits vertically, but actually it leans back just a tiny bit. There are 2 cords for the charger. One is for 120 or 240 volts. It senses the voltage automatically. The other provided cord plugs into a cigarette lighter. Note that this provides the ability to charge the battery while mobile, but this is not a battery eliminator, and the manual says to leave the radio off while it's charging. The battery itself is a hefty 3.6 amp hour battery that provides the nominal 7.2 volts the radio wants. Note that using 10 watts will run this battery down more quickly than using 5 watts. The battery slips on by placing the battery on the radio, then gently pushing it into place until it clicks. The battery can be removed by pushing this tab down, sliding the battery down a bit, and then lifting it off. Note that this is a lithium-ion battery. It has very high energy density and needs to be charged carefully. These 4 tabs on the back, which are live by the way, are designed so that each cell in the battery is charged separately. Don't just connect power to each end of the pack. You could be looking at a fire if you do. Use only the charger that comes with the radio. This is essential. These chargers are not cross-compatible. The rig comes with 2 antennas, one short and one long. The longer one is supposed to give you a better signal. If you look inside here, the design frequency range for the antenna is shown. The antennas have the male SMA connector, which is different from the Baofeng radios, which have female SMA connectors. As an aside, this made me wonder if a TYT antenna would connect to a Baofeng antenna. The answer is yes, though I have no idea what you might use this for. There's a belt clip with a mighty stiff spring. Oddly enough, there's no strap, nor is there a flashlight. Also, there's a little headset which, by the way, follows the Kenwood interface. And, very important, the programming cable and the software. More on programming later. Something I haven't yet figured out is the verification tags. 2 came with mine. Let's take a look at using the radio. You turn it on and off with the rightmost knob, which also adjusts the volume. The rather dour female voice announces power on and shows the battery voltage. Note that you can change both of these behaviors via menus. The top knob, nicely set a bit higher so it can be reached easily, will change channels, change frequency, and can also change between menu options. The light on top glows green on receive, red on transmit, and is otherwise off. Let's look at the front panel. I'll describe the big 4, the buttons you'll use the most. The first is F, which stands for function. Pressing this brings up the menu. If you hit this accidentally and don't push any other buttons, after a little while, the radio times out and goes back to normal. The UV toggles the transmitter between the top and bottom frequency. It also acts as an escape key if you're doing something in the function menu mode that you're not sure of. Okay, let's get into some uncharted territory here. The hash key on the lower right is the key you press to toggle back and forth between channel mode, sometimes called memory or MR, and frequency mode, sometimes called VFO. Wouldn't it be nice if the key actually said that? It's just something you have to remember or else put on a cheat sheet. The next key that's useful is the star key at the lower left. It's used in some menus to progress to the next character. Again, not marked as such. Now to the more normal keys. The up and down arrow keys are just that. If in memory mode, they'll go up and down the channel list. If VFO mode, the frequency steps up or down. The push to talk button does just that. Press to send and release to receive. Note that when the radio isn't receiving anything, it's said to be in standby instead of receive. The Moni button removes the squelch so that you can hear very faint signals in the noise, sometimes handy for marginal situations. The orange button, not shown in the manual's diagram, but mentioned later in the text, will put a rather piercing 1750 Hz tone on the air. This is used with repeaters in other areas, such as Europe. You can also use it to get other people's attention. Like I said, It's piercing. Over here we have a flap that covers the microphone and earphone jacks. Note that if you leave this hanging open, it creates a path for water to get inside the radio, so keep it snugly snapped in place when you're not using it. By the way, this is also where the programming cable plugs in. Let's look at the screen itself. The top frequency is the primary channel and the lower is the secondary channel. Which one you'll transmit on when you press push to talk is indicated by the little triangle, which you toggle back and forth using the UV button. The radio has two modes, channel and frequency. The manual is a bit inconsistent in usage. Sometimes channel is called memory or MR, and sometimes frequency is called VFO, which stands for variable frequency oscillator, which is something you can set directly. Basically, the channels are what you program in, and the frequency or VFO mode is where you input a frequency directly. You can tell the difference. If little channel numbers appear, you're in channel mode. No channel numbers, and you're in frequency mode. Now, I want to talk about dual watch, which is a nice feature of this rig. By default, the radio is in dual watch mode. So if a signal comes in on either one of the frequencies showing, you'll hear it in the speaker. Note that there's only a little tiny dot to tell you which frequency is active. If you miss this, you don't know on which frequency to respond. If you're in a group, say providing communications for a marathon, you might want to have each station say something like, "This is KEØOG on 146.52. That way you'll know which one to answer. You can press UV to quickly switch between the primary and secondary frequencies, and yes, these can both be on the same band. Now, and this is important to note, if someone is talking on one of the frequencies, you won't hear someone who tries to come in at the same time on the other frequency. Dual watch as an option can be turned off via menu 6. If dual watch is off, you'll only hear the frequency that has the arrow by it selected by the UV key. There's a pretty good table in the manual that describes all the little indicators on the screen. I note in passing that one of the icons describes a scramble mode. Using such a mode on ham radio is illegal, and fortunately, there's no way to enable it for the 8000E. Ham radio is for hobby communications, and we hams often provide communication services in time of emergency. But if you need to scramble communications, you need to use a service other than amateur radio. Note that you can change the background color between any of three colors. Whatever color you choose, it stays the same no matter which mode, including transmit, receive, and standby, you're on. Also, the screen is readily viewable in full sunlight. Okay, the manual gives some info on setting up menus, but it doesn't really address what are often called use cases, which are merely different ways of using the radio. Let's start out with a simple use case, that of conversing directly with a friend on simplex. Let's suppose you both pick 146.52 MHz, the U.S. national calling frequency. So let's make sure we're in frequency mode by pressing the hash key so that no channel numbers appear. Use the UV key to pick either the primary or secondary frequency. Now, without holding in any other buttons, press 146.520. Always 6 digits.
5, 2, 0.
Now, when you transmit, you're both sending and receiving on that single frequency. Now, I recommend programming repeater frequencies and so forth using the computer software. But just to show it can be done from the keypad, let's set up a channel for a local repeater. In this case, it's in Montrose, Colorado, on 146.79 MHz with a positive offset. Let's also assume a subaudible CTCSS tone of 107.2 Hz is required, and we'll want to label it as Montrose. Bear with me a couple minutes while we do this, as it demonstrates generally how to use the functions. Are you ready? First, we need to enter in the repeater offset. This has to be done in frequency mode, so use the hash key to get there if you're not already there. In the US, the 2-meter repeater offset is 600 kilohertz or 0.6 megahertz. So, press F, then 3, and 3 again for menu 33. Press F again, then use the knob on top to get to 0.600. Then F again, and UV to escape. Okay, now comes the direction of the shift. Function 32, which is shift direction, F, then choose negative, then F, then UV. Okay, now function 29, then F, then we have to tell it which type of tone. Press the star key to cycle through the modes. The 6-7, of all things, signifies the CTCSS tones. The D023N is another version of coding not often used. Now that we've selected the form of the tone, we need to select the value. So function, then 31, then F, then either up, down, or twist selector to 107.2. Then F again, then UV. Okay, now we're set up for the repeater. So let's put this in a memory channel. Press that F again, now the hash key, choose a channel, see up here, then F again. Now, we want to name the channel. Be sure you're in channel mode on the channel we just put something in. Select F, then 28, then F, then twist the knob to get to letter or character you want. Then press star, select the next letter, then star, then next letter, up to 7 characters, then finally F. And then we're done, right? No. Now, all those settings are also in the frequency mode and are there no matter where you turn the dial. So you must now go back into frequency mode and undo all those changes so that frequency mode is back to simplex. Needless to say, using a computer to program the radio is far easier, but you don't always have your computer available when you need one. Since we have to use the computer to set up the crossband repeater mode, let's tackle that. Unfortunately, my computer would not read the mini disc that came with the radio. It kept telling me there was no disc. So I had 2 chores. First, find the driver for the cable, then get the programming software. While it looks like just a cable, there's actually a chip inside the USB end. A company called Prolific makes these chips, and they basically convert USB to RS-232. One of the problems is that counterfeit Prolific chips have flooded the market. So a few years ago, Prolific updated its drivers and its chips to exclude the older counterfeit chips. If you simply plug in the USB end, a Windows 7 and above computer will immediately recognize the Prolific chip and install the correct driver. But if you go into Device Manager, you may see that the device refuses to start. The error code is 10. This means that the chip is either counterfeit or is of the older model that is no longer supported. When I use Prolific's program to check my chip version, it's an old one that is no longer supported. Whether it's counterfeit or not, I don't know, but TYT definitely needs to ship programming cables that work with Windows 8 and 10. The solution is to get an older driver that doesn't care which chip number it is. I did manage to find an old driver from the year 2007, and I used it to get my computer to recognize the cable. By the way, I spent a couple days getting this to work. Now, here's something interesting. The TYT cable, once the driver is sorted out, seems to work with several brands of Chinese radios. Once I had the driver working, I could use both my TYT and my Oshing cable to program both the TYT and Oshing radios. I found the UV8000E software on the Radioddity website. It's in RAR format rather than zip. So I found an RAR reader on the Microsoft website and used it to unpack the exe file inside. It loaded without incident, and moments after getting the driver software sorted out, I was looking at the screen to program the radio. So, plug the USB end into the computer, then turn off the radio and plug it into the headphone/microphone jack, being sure to push it in all the way, and I do mean all the way. Then start the software. Turn on the radio, then go into Setup, Communications Port, then select the correct communications port. In my case, it's 5, as 3 and 4 are used by my Yaesu HF rig. Now, and this is important, before doing anything programming-wise, you want to read out the radio's internal programming, which means transferring everything from the radio to the software. Click OK to begin. While you're doing this, the radio will say PC COM and the red light will blink. It takes a while because it really does read out the contents of every memory, all 128 of them, even if they're blank, plus several other miscellaneous settings. Another little window will tell you the readout is completed. Now, let's go down the menu items on the side. By the way, you have to double-click them. The radio information just tells you a little bit about the radio. On mine, the serial number does not populate. This window is read-only. The next window is frequency information. The Freq down info is for the secondary channel, the bottom one on the screen. This is what the radio opens to in frequency mode. In this case, the bottom frequency is 435.55 megahertz. You can change this if you want, but any further changes you make on the radio will write over this. Let's look at the table values. The offset frequency is the 0.6 megahertz we put in earlier. By the way, the repeater offset for the 70 centimeter band in the United States is 5 megahertz. Let's just set all this to 0. Duplex means whether or not to use the offset. The frequency step is the amount the frequency steps when you use the arrow keys or the knob. Note this really doesn't matter much because you can enter any frequency directly on the keypad. But I'm going to change this to 5 kilohertz. The next two panels have to do with the CTCSS tone. Decode means your radio squelch won't open unless it detects the tone. Except for special purpose uses, leave this off. Also, given these are really your simplex settings, set them both to off. The wide narrower refers to the amount of deviation, and this should be set to wide. The transmit power is either 10 watts for high or 5 watts for low. Remember that at 5 watts, which is good for most purposes, you will extend the time before the battery needs recharging. The PTT ID says whether to send a beep at the beginning of transmission, end of transmission, both, or not at all. Please choose not at all. Those beeps are really annoying. Now we do the same thing for the upper or primary frequency. Again, let's set everything as though we were using simplex. Now let's go to the channel information. The channel numbers are along the left-hand side. The receive frequency and transmit frequency are set separately. You'll have to calculate the offset for the transmit frequency. Note here that you can transmit on one band and receive on another. The next two columns have to do with needing to receive a tone to open the squelch, usually turned off, and whether to send a tone, which varies from repeater to repeater. Set the transmission power. Wide, narrow is always wide in amateur radio. The scan add means do you want to include this channel when you do a channel scan? You might want to exclude a channel from scan if it's always on, such as listening to the weather radio. Leave busy lock off. Leave Vox off, as I don't recommend Vox for VHF equipment. I have no idea what the epilogue is. Leave PTT ID off, that's the beep again, and leave DTMF off unless your application requires it. You can put a name in up to 7 characters long. The ID code is another feature that can be left at 0. Next comes the FM. Your radio can receive the commercial FM band, and you need to set some things up here. First, the frequency in the United States starts at 87.5 and goes up to 107.9. Note that the digit to the right of the decimal point is always an odd integer, meaning 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9. The FM step in the United States is 200 kilohertz. This is important. There's both a frequency mode and a channel mode for the FM channels, so you can put your favorite FM stations into FM channels, which are separate from the other channels. And when the FM radio is playing, you switch between frequency and channel mode with that useful little hash key. Now, the FM scan bound can't be changed. Be sure to click the box so that if there's activity on one of the ham frequencies, the FM receiver is muted. The Vox function we can leave alone. The scan mode information is entered here. I'm not covering scan in this video other than to mention that it can, and it can scan your channels or it can scan the band. Okay, optional settings is an important screen. The open show means what to show when the radio is first turned on. The DC option means show the battery voltage. The mode the radio opens in can be a combination of things. If you like it to open just with channels, you can do that. Note you also have an option to have it come up with the FM radio playing. Channel's name asks whether you want to show channel names or just the frequencies. The voice can be English or Chinese or off. Next comes that beep. The lamp auto means that the backlight only comes on for a little bit after the key is pressed. It's probably best to leave it there, as leaving it on all the time will run down the battery. Key lock means do you want the radio to open locked or unlocked? I choose manual so it won't lock by itself after a period of inactivity. The next two settings allow you to enter frequencies directly. In the next column, you can set a name for the radio and some settings that don't matter, just leave them alone. Color is the color of the light for the background. You have 3 choices. Number 1 is the orange. Skip down to crossband function. Leave this off so the radio won't power up with the crossband function enabled. However, be sure to check the box labeled crossband setting, as this is the magic setting that allows the radio to operate as a crossband repeater. Perhaps in the future releases of the UV8000E, this box will come checked by default, but for now, you have to check this box using the software prior to using crossband repeating. The DTMF function can be left alone. In the past, DTMF tones were used for auto-patching, and you can still send DTMF tones. Press PTT to go into transmit mode, and then the keypad is a DTMF keypad. But auto-patches are pretty much the thing of the past. Okay, now that everything is set up, let's save these settings. Create a name for this group of settings. That way, if everything gets mixed up, you can reset the radio to the saved settings. Now is the most important step. So far, everything you've done is only on the computer. The last step is to write these settings to the radio. Click Program, then Write to Radio, and then OK. The green light on the radio blinks as the program is updated. When it's done, press OK on the pop-up window. Now we're ready to address the key feature of the UV8000E, the crossband repeater. It's easier to use than you might think. You turn it on via function 11, which is labeled merely Turn. Sort of a dark horse, isn't it? And here's how it works. Select a channel or input a frequency for the upper or primary frequency. Then select another channel or input a frequency for the secondary frequency. Note that both frequencies must be either channel or VFO. You can't mix. Let's assume both are simplex. By the way, you don't just pick frequencies at random. Rather, you need to know which frequencies are considered simplex frequencies in your area. It varies by ARRL section. I picked two simplex frequencies that we use here in Colorado, 146.505 and 441.425. So, turn on menu 11. The radio picks up anything heard on either frequency and retransmits it on the other frequency at the same time. So if you're using this locally for an event, each of the radios that use it will transmit on one band and receive on the other. You can see how this works in this chart. The other radios must be dual band and must be capable of transmitting on one band while hearing on another. Or you can do it differently. One of the other radios can be 2-meter simplex and the other 440 simplex. The possibilities are endless. Now, here's the really interesting part. Let's assume one of the channels is for a repeater, say on 2 meters, and the other channel is a 440 simplex frequency. So if someone with another radio tuned to the 440 simplex frequency presses push to talk and transmits, the UV8000E will pick that up and transmit it on the repeater's input frequency. Anything then coming out of the repeater will be picked up by the UV8000E and sent back out on the 440 simplex frequency. One scenario for this is that if the repeater doesn't get down into canyons, the UV8000E could be in someone's car at the rim, and then those in the canyon can simply use handhelds, and it's just as though they're conversing on the repeater with folks across town. Amazing, really, and all in a little package like this for a price well under $100. I think you can tell that I'm pretty impressed by this radio. If you're new to ham radio, you can easily skip the bargain basement radios and go upscale for not much more money. Do I recommend this as a first radio for a new technician? Yes, it's a great radio, and you won't outgrow it for a while. How about for the extra class ham who'd like to experiment with some of the other features? Certainly. The price is right, and it's a great rig out of the box. Now, I haven't talked about some of the other features like scanning, selective calling, and so forth, but I think that's enough to get you started. You can go to keØOG.net/UV8000E to find a link that will take you to Radioddity.com. If you use that link, you're also supporting my channel, Ham Radio Answers. I hope to see you on the air. This is Dave, KEØOG, wishing you the best in your gear hunting and 73.